Chris, how are you doing?
I'm good.
We've got a room full of 5,000 people here.
All righty.
Okay, I feel a
I
little.
can see the sort of tops of the heads of some of you, but
How about
that's great.
Okay. You should know that all of these students are at risk of dropping out of school.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm supposed to say that stop them dropping out? Or?
Right now in the next 30 minutes.
All right.
We are really thrilled to get to speak with you. I'm going to ask the first question, and then I think the remainder will be from students. A few days ago, some of us went to Duke for the commencement address, and Paul Farmer was speaking. And one of the things that Paul has hammered away at a lot over the last 5 years is he believes more money should be given directly to Haiti's government, and less money should be given to NGOs, that it's an inefficient model that we have today. Would you agree with that? Do you have the data to back that up, that going around the government is actually inefficient in terms of health outcomes?
That's a great question. It's obviously a hot debate. I think the answer to that depends where. I think giving money to dysfunctional governments like Somalia is probably not terribly helpful. So I think there's, in fragile states or places that are essentially governments don't work, NGOs are your only option. Elsewhere, I think it's a tougher call. And I don't think, data-wise, we really know the answer to that, and I'm not sure there's a general one-size-fits-all answer.
Thank you. Hallelujah.
Hi, my name is Halvia, and my question to you is, reading Epic Measures, I clearly understand that you are the person who motivates your team to work hard and to give the most accurate data. And earlier this year, we read a book called 1,000 Hills about Paul Kagame, and Paul Kagame is the person who pushes his country to work hard and lift Rwanda out of poverty. And he's sometimes perceived as the bad guy because he pushes them too hard. Have you ever experienced that? And if so, how would you handle those people who don't meet your expectations?
Yes, I am sometimes perceived as the bad guy. I'm very thick-skinned and very driven, shall we say. So, I think people just get used to dealing with me, and I try to, let me put it this way, I have a favorite saying that I trot out, only occasionally, that I only use sparingly, which is when things don't happen the way I think they can, I have the question, are you stupid or lazy? Now, sometimes you ask for things that are impossible, and it's my fault, and I try to, learn that. But otherwise, I definitely try to push hard. But, people, it's interesting that people don't mind. Actually, if there's some value, if there's a higher purpose to what we're doing, I think if you're running a business and you're just trying to make more money, that might be a bit harder to push that hard. But so, yes, good question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna. In the book, I noticed that a lot of the time when the WHO didn't like your data, they sort of just discredited it and said that it wasn't true. So I'm wondering how you think we should go about getting organizations to be collaborative and cooperative and actually accept each other's data, but still also be competitive and trying to push each other to be more innovative.
That is, that's a big issue. So I think it depends a lot on leadership of organizations, right? The exact same organization, World Health Organization or parts of the UN, or can be very different if leadership views, that it's useful to have competition on some of the science side, but collaboration on what the ultimate mission is. So I don't think it's the sort of institutional structure that's the problem. It's sort of getting the right leadership, and the problem there is that There's in organizations where there's an election, a intergovernmental organization for one country, one vote. There's an easy platform to run on, which is sort of a one that says, you the countries are always, you the governments, it's always governments sitting on the table, are always the ones who know best. And then you end up with an organization where leadership or the people who get elected don't really want to tread on anybody's toes. And that's where we get into the sort of situation that you're describing. Isn't always happen that way. And so I think, part of that is to sort of lobby those who are selecting leaders to, take that more collaborative view. I think in general the direction is better these days, right? The world's expectations for transparency go up. I think it's harder and harder for organizations to sort of ignore that. And as that happens, and as they sort of like what we do, people now realize that we're not going to go away. I think we're seeing, WHO, for example, just being much more collaborative. We actually signed a memorandum of understanding with them a couple of days ago. I think it's a sign of the times.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan. So you just mentioned some of the flaws of democracy, and earlier this year we had a chance to meet with Howard Buffett, the philanthropist, and we talked to him about Paul Kagame, who kind of is considered to be a benevolent dictator. And so, you're trying to show the data that would help lift a lot of really unhealthy people or people in unhealthy situations out of those situations. Do you think it's more effective to have these democratic institutions that are supposedly free and fair, or is it better to use the effectiveness that comes of the authoritarian regimes to have a bigger impact?
Hey, like democracy, so, for every example of the benign, autocrat, there's more examples of the reverse, right? The not so benign autocrat. So for all its warts, I think the democracy is a very good thing. And I think that there are not that many Paul Kagames that you could point to. And I mean, you could point to, some people point to China and say, look, very autocratic, but enormously effective at getting out of poverty. They're actually pretty effective on the public health side. But nevertheless, you can also point to democratic models that do that well, and you can point to lots of examples where things go wrong. So, was that the sort of direction of your question, or were you at? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Hi. Earlier this year, we were at the World Bank and we spoke with Jim Kim, and I asked him about mental illness in and of itself, and he said the best way to handle it would be to build health systems. And I was looking at your website the other day, and I noticed that countries with some of the best health systems in the world, like the U.S., have a higher rate of mental illness, and I was wondering why that is, and what can we do to tackle that?
Great question. The problem we have with mental illness is that the tools available to treat, whether it's, cognitive therapy or drugs or a combination, they're, very useful, they can help, but they're not great. And so if you look at the numbers and say, think of a big pie chart, which is the burden of depression or bipolar disorder, even if you had the best primary care and you trained up everybody to help make the diagnosis and you had community support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the best you're going to do is reduce the burden by about a quarter. So you still have 3/4 of the burden unaddressed. And that's really brings us back to sort of fundamental research as to what are the risks that lead to mental illness. Is it things that happen to you in fetal life? Is it in early childhood? And are there actually interventions that we can make that are better? So there's a huge longer-term R&D agenda, even if we should be really trying hard on using the available but not ideal tools. So that's one factor. The other one is there are some, although most of the mental disorders, I don't know what you were looking at crude rates or age standardized rates, but there's a very strong age pattern. So as societies get, and mental illness actually peaks around 30, 40 in those age groups. So it's unusual. It's not kids, it's not the older ages. But as societies, fertility goes down and the age pattern shifts, you actually do get higher rates in that sense. And so that's also part of what happens in development.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Chris. This is Angela. And in Epic Measures, you're portrayed as a person with a lot of ambition and a person who likes to think outside the box. And so, based on this, what do you think about the current education in the United States, like the education system, and that's currently trying to standardize the way we learn? And in addition to this, what advice do you have for teachers that are trying to encourage students to think outside the box?
I benefited in school from having a school that was like super flexible, and let people do what they wanted to do if they had some drive to do that. The standardization one, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about So I think the problem there is that there's some really bad schools, and I think the standardized testing,
On cue.
the testing and that part is probably going to help, right? It's going to help a lot in those schools that are really not, delivering to students what should be. On the other hand, I think you're right that it's not ideal for the smaller subset of students who really want to, push their own innovation and learn in their own way. So I don't have a good answer as to how to balance those. For a teacher, my experience as a teacher, which is obviously mostly in college and grad school, is to try to accommodate those students who want something different and want to, pursue ideas in their own way. So some mixture of standardized material and flexibility about, making space for what people want to do on their own.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, Chris, I want to interject one thing. This next student got in an argument. You can come on up. With her mom. She's so sick. She lost her voice, and her mom said she should not come to school, but she was determined to talk to you.
And you got sick from the argument, or no? The argument was not to come to school.
It was about not being able to come to school.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Chris. I'm Ellie, and my question is, earlier this year we were studying Nigeria and Boko Haram, and I was wondering how you adjust your health metrics and gather data in countries where there are regional conflicts and where there is a population that's outside of the government's control, and also where there are refugees who are maybe flowing into other countries.
Very hard. Nigeria is legendarily hard, even in the parts that don't have conflict, because there's this history, distorted, lousy data, and there's probably an element of corruption that's going on there. So, everyone sort of groans when you say Nigeria on the sort of measurement side, because it's just been such a hard place to pinpoint. It's getting a little better. But in general, what people have tried to do, and what we've used is, some of the groups, and largely NGOs, that try to reach into conflict zones and collect some sort of data. So, for example, in Somalia, there's groups that have done some surveys for child health. But otherwise, you're depending on, it's just a big gap, and you get huge uncertainty, and sort of depending on, informed guesses that are, basically what logistical models are trying to say. That what little data has been collected in places that have conflict, we're trying to sort of borrow strength in the Bayesian sense.
Sorry.
What's the beeping?
It's the bells.
Oh, okay. Very hard, bottom line, and we depend a lot on, the sort of modeling process to give us a guess of what's going on.
Thank you.
I want to tell you a little bit about this next student. Do you know Dan Ariely?
Keep going.
Okay, so we went over to Dan's lab at Duke, and most students would find it an incredible opportunity. Campbell was about 8 feet away from Dan Ariely, and he fell asleep.
Uh-oh. Nice try.
It was warm. So I'm Campbell. It's nice to meet you. So in reading Epic Measures, one of the things that stuck out to me was how your project was constantly growing and adding new diseases and gathering new data for those diseases. And so I was wondering, going forward, how do you see the project continuing to grow? And are you excited, worried? How do you see the path moving forward?
So, the two directions we're trying to go, which I'm actually rather excited about. One is doing the analysis at a very fine spatial level. So there's this thing called the Malaria Atlas Project. You go online, you can find it. And they map malaria for a bunch of reasons down to the 1 kilometer square level. So what they're trying to produce is, what's the prevalence of malaria by 1 kilometer square to help targeting malaria interventions, whether they're BedNet programs or residual spraying, and there's an elimination eradication agenda for malaria. The mapping exercise is really useful. So the guy that's the architect of this, Simon Hayes, just recently moved to us, and from Oxford, and we're trying now, next we're going to map HIV, TB, diarrhea, pneumonia, lymphatic filariasis, onchocerciasis, and human African trypanosomiasis. And the idea is that maybe eventually we can map every disease and maintain these on a regular basis so that regardless of the entity, the geographic area you're interested in, it's your city, your county, your state, you could get access to the information about that place. So I think that's one. And computationally, the sort of, you couldn't do this in the past because of the sort of statistical power required and the computation to support that sort of modeling just couldn't be done. It was too expensive, blah, blah, blah. Now we can do this. And so that's sort of neat, and I think we'll progressively reveal, disparities that we didn't know about. It'll help people target interventions, and we'll learn about successes and failures at a more local level. So that's one direction. The other direction that's sort of I'm spending most of my time on these days is forecasting. So we're trying to, we did it once in the 90s, forecast burden of disease, and now we're using all the sort of more sophisticated methods that are available to us. We're actually trying to forecast the burden of disease for every geography, 25 years in the future, baseline, and then create an environment where you could ask a whole array of what-if questions. What if we did a better job of tobacco control? Or what if we, had a faster improvement in poverty rates? Or what if we, rolled out clean cook stoves, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the two things that I'm most excited about on the burden of disease.
Thank you very much.
You didn't fall asleep.
Hi, I'm Sadie. So this year we learned a little bit about the Ebola crisis and how not only did it have a toll on human lives, but also on nations and health systems, and it caused widespread fear, and there was an economic impact, and nations, like the borders were closed. And recently we looked a bit at your website, and it didn't seem like your system had a way to measure this. And I was wondering if in the future you would come up with some way to measure this, or if there's some issues that you just can't measure.
So we are going to add Ebola this year. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're doing, because there's 3 other hemorrhagic fevers that have the risk of sort of large-scale contagion. So that's Lhasa, it's Congo, Crimea, and Marburg. And for all four of those, there's this task called niche mapping. So there's a way to map where there are communities are at risk, usually from zoonotic transfer, from animals to humans. And then what we're going to try to do is lay on top of that in the forecasting work, what's the probability first of jumping from animals to humans, and then on top of that, what's the probability of sort of health system failure, so that you can sort of say who's at risk of potentially one of these viruses having another large-scale Ebola type outbreak. So that's part of what we're planning to do on Ebola and the other three. To the sort of, and it sort of circles back to the forecasting thing, sort of the health system knock-on consequences of, the sort of both the system response and the population's response to an outbreak. We hope to try to capture in the forecasting framework that we're building. Very complicated, right? Because to do that well, you have to somehow capture in the sort of models of the future all these different possible futures. And in some, there may be an outbreak and it may spread, or there may be civil conflict and the health system may break down. And then if there is an outbreak, that's more likely to spread. So there are these interconnections that are sort of nonlinear and interesting from that point of view. And that's sort of why we're trying to build this new forecasting platform. So that's sort of our attempt to address that question.
Hey Chris, my name is Caleb. It's good to see you.
I have a nephew named Caleb. There you go.
Wow. Well, looks like I'm not seeing you so much anymore.
Uh-oh.
There's an ad that's come on.
All right. Well, anyway, my question has to do with good data. So, after reading Epic Measures, it's apparent that good data is really hard to come by and hard to get. So, when it comes down to the line, if you've got a hunch that some data isn't quite right or it's imperfect, how do you deal with that? Do you release it in hopes that it may self-correct, or that someone will critique it or find a new answer, or do you exempt it?
Well, we sort of have some core beliefs around data that evolved out of all the burden of disease work. One is we should always look at what data that are out there, because there's sort of there's data nihilists that say, oh, the data is unreliable, so I'm going to just continue in my belief system and ignore all data because it might be unreliable. So that's less than ideal in my view. Second is that if there's anything that we know that's biased about data, that there's a particular direction, for example, somebody gives you data on the number of diabetics that are being diagnosed. Well, we know it's biased because people who didn't get access to care can't be diagnosed. So we know that the counts that you get from that sort of health service data can't be too high, they can only be too low. So that's a bias. And, our belief is that we should try to correct for bias. And there's a bunch of statistical and other ways to do that. So you want to correct for bias. Even after you've done that, there are still just some wacky studies, measurements. And then there is a subjective element that says, 100% of people just can't really be dying from poisoning. So if somebody has a study that says that there is some level of, this just can't be true, that we say can't be true, and we're going to list it in our tool so you can see it in the data visualizations, like the primary data, so that we're sort of transparent about it, but we mark it as an outlier and say we just don't believe it. So there is still sometimes, and I think when we've counted this out, but all the data points that we look at, that's well less than 1% where we make that sort of extreme judgment subjectively saying, this just can't be right. So,
Hi, I'm Haley.
hi.
So I went through the website and I was looking at autism, and I found that it mainly affects the U.S. and Canada, and compared to the rest of the world. Is this due to overdiagnosis or the cultural differences around the world?
Very hot question, and let me just pull, hard to know, right? There's this whole ascertainment question that people have as to whether, I'm just trying to pull up the new GBD 2013 results at my end while we're talking. So there's an element there of ascertainment that's people, lots of debate, and there is also an element of, lots of theories, right? So autism is one of the trickier ones right now for us to actually have a good sense of, and it also just reflects really limited data that's out there outside the high-income world. So I would say watch that space as people try to learn more about it. And for some reason, hold on, let me just see if I can. I thought the difference was not that great for once you look at age standardized rates, but let me see if that is incorrect. All right, last attempt to have a look at the age standardized rates at this end. Yeah, Australia is the highest for autism, right? The age standardized rates. So, actually, let me just see if I can show this. See if technology works here. Can you see?
Wow.
So that's the new GBD Compare. It's our new version that will be coming out this summer. And it has all our visualizations now in one place with all these little icons that you can scroll through. And that's autism rates there. And, the range across country is not huge. It's from the lowest end, 70 up to about 82 on age standardized rates. So it's, in the absence of better data, the basic idea is we suspect that autism is about the same everywhere. With a little bit of variation.
Thank you.
You get that my lovely face back.
Hey Chris, I'm Dylan. So, after reading Epic Measures, it seemed like not all the countries wanted to work collaboratively with you. An example of that is North Korea, where they actually lied and said that not anyone is sick. I was wondering if there was an experience or story that is not in the book that you would care to share or tell us about.
About people not wanting to collaborate?
Yeah, and how you fixed that and got around it.
There's in some parts of the world, there's a bunch of governments in the Middle East around, maternal mortality, particularly, very sensitive topic, and a lot of resistance to using anything but official government data. And I think there's some places where culturally, with government, they're just not used to the idea that you don't simply do what the government says. And the Middle East has been particularly strong about that. So there's many examples there of the government saying, no, you can't use survey data, you should use what we tell you. And of course, we don't do that. So there's been many examples down the line to that. I mean, North Korea is extreme, but this is more of our maternal mortality rate is X because we say it's a type of discussion. That's a long, slow debate. I think that the 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, most people didn't want to even struggle with those governments to sort of argue, at least in the UN system. Now it's just, partly because we're around and others are around who are sort of making independent reporting. Now I think it's much harder to maintain that extreme view. I think now even the most, other than sort of outlandish governments, most governments feel they have to justify their position with some data behind them, and not just say this is the truth in our country. once. It's rather painful for me to go through it, so I don't remember the other examples in the book, but anyway.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris, we want to respect your time. We have 2 questions left, one from Anna and one from me. So Anna, you're the final student question.
Hi, Chris. I'm Anna.
Hi.
So while being blind in the U.S. is certainly an impediment, it's a lot less of an impediment than in other areas where people rely on manual labor to earn a living. So I'm just wondering how you factor societal issues like this into the DALYs, and how you are able to quantify that very qualitative side of the data.
So we do not, by intention, right? So, and the distinction here, and I think over the years, I think we've gotten clearer about making the arguments around this. And this is sort of this gang of philosophers that we've engaged with about this have helped a lot. So if you were trying to measure well-being or welfare in a broader sense, then you would clearly want to take that into account. But that seems very hard to do. It's a big ask to measure well-being or welfare in the broadest notion. So our ambition is much smaller. It's to measure health, and the argument there is, health is health, and blindness is blindness. But the social consequences will be different in different places, and that's relevant. We don't want to capture that in the measure of health, but it's obviously relevant for society. Each society in deciding how they want to spend money or address inequalities, that's really important. And so, one of the main insights there is you don't actually, even money that's supposed to be for health, you wouldn't want to spend that money just to improve health, right? Or in the language around this, your maximization, or the thing that you want to maximize would not just be health. You want to also think in the way you spend money about addressing inequalities, taking into account, maybe something that's relatively minor from a health point of view has enormous social stigma, and you would do a huge amount for well-being by addressing that issue. So there are these other things that come into account, and one of the best examples of somebody who sort of uses intelligently the sort of metrics that help inform but not dictate how you spend money was Julio Frank, who was Minister of Health in Mexico, and Julio had a nice description of this, which is you want to start from the evidence, you want to know what people's problems are, and you want to know the opportunities, but there's this whole set of other social priority type issues that have to factor in as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, well, Chris, last question. There's some students in the room who may be seeing you. Jeremy, we Skyped with the author Jeremy Smith last week, and he said you and he and Paul may be doing an event in Boston next year. And we're going to try and get a grant to go up there and see you, so we may catch you in person. But most of us won't see you, but we've been influenced by your book, and by the book about you, and we are really moved to think that there are many ways of making a difference in the world. To a group of 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, if you want to make a difference in the world, can you give us a piece of advice, however small or big that might be?
I think it is in the book. It's my, it's the family motto. Do good work that matters. I mean, follow what you think is important, and make sure that you're doing the best you can, and that what it is that you're working on is something that actually will have matter to somebody. And that can be a pretty diverse set of options, but that would be my little advice. My last comment to you is, I want to be a student in your class. How do you guys meet all these interesting people? Sounds a lot better than high school that I went to. So
Your door is opening, and we wonder, is it Bill Gates back there?
it is not. It's Linda.
Okay. Tell Linda hi. Thanks a lot, Chris. You were awesome.
All
right, everybody, let's say bye. Bye.